Welcome to the Dance Centre podcast. I am your host, Claire French, and I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, also known as Vancouver, Canada. I'll be talking to dancers, choreographers and other members of the dance world here on the West Coast to find out more about their creative work and practices and to discuss what it means to us to be dance professionals today. Thanks for joining us. Tasha Faye Evans is a dancer, theatre artist, creative consultant, cultural programmer and educator from Coast Salish, Welsh and European Jewish grandparents. Her work is an integration of dance, theatre and culture driven by the sacred responsibility to care for the future of all our relations. Her dance practice is directly related to the land and the cultural teachings of the ancestors' eye, a symbol of Coast Salish design and a core teaching of our culture. Tasha's current projects include Cedar Woman, a dance honouring a legacy of Coast Salish women spanning all the way back to a tree in the Great Flood, and In the Presence of Ancestors, a lifelong exhibition of 5 Coast Salish house posts being carved and raised in Port Moody. An independent artist, her work has been presented by various companies including Company Orazga, Raven Spirit Dance and Dancers of Damla Hamid. Tasha was most recently awarded the 2023 Edge Prize for her leadership in cultural resurgence. There is not a word in Coast Salish culture for art. Our art is functional. Our dances, prayers, our songs, blessings. I am an artist because I love fiercely, and creating work is my way of having hope, preserving the sacred and imagining a better future for all our relations. Those are the words of Tasha Faye Evans, and I'm delighted to introduce you to her now. I am joined today by the formidable dancer, theatre artist, educator, creative consultant, cultural programmer. That is Tasha Faye Evans. Welcome, Tasha. And I'm delighted we get to speak to each other again. We did speak to each other during COVID, actually, when we were doing our isolated, masked up in a different way, conversations in the studio. But it was a delight to meet with you then and to have you tell the story of Cedar Woman and where you were at with that work. And again, here, we have the opportunity to discuss its evolution, if you like. I'm quite excited about that. I'm very excited about the whole thing. But so many more things. We have this opportunity to talk with you about so many things. So welcome, Tasha. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I thought we might start with some of your current projects because I think that gives a really wonderful context as to the breadth of what you're doing right now, and also an opportunity over the course of this conversation to kind of maybe weave in and out of the dance, theatre, community work, and in a way just to kind of open up the doors so that you can kind of tell the listeners about your life and what you're up to kind of in your own way. So yeah, I thought I will just mention just some of the projects that I know you're working on right now, and then maybe we could just open it up to you to take over from there. So we have Cedar Woman, which is what was originally a solo work and is moving potentially into group work, or solo performance, I should say, because it's collaborative venture. A dance honouring a legacy of Coast Salish women spanning all the way back to a tree in the Great Flood. I love that line of yours. In the Presence of Ancestors, which is, as you call it, a lifelong exhibition of 5 Coast Salish house posts being carved and raised in Port Moody. Love to hear more about that from your perspective. And your work with local artists about Coast Salish art and design and land-based contemporary Coast Salish art practices. Some of the people you mention, Ronnie Dean Harris, Erin Nelson Moody, and James Harry. I'm sure there are many others. But yeah, I'd love for you to talk how you would like about those current projects individually, how they're weaving. Where are you at? Where is Tasha Faye Evans at today?
Well, I'm riding a little bit of a high because yesterday concluded a month-long Coast Salish art and design and dance symposium that I was so grateful for the Dance Centre to help me host. So it began with 2 just gatherings where we could just listen to knowledge keepers and artists speak about Swokyam, which is our original stories that are actually literally written into the land, that stories that we turn to because they were there to remind us how to be good humans and how to walk in the world in a good way and in relation to all our whole family, which is the earth, the water, the two-leggeds, the four-leggeds, the winged ones, the standing ones. And in the core of Swohiam, and forgive me if I'm to all my language carriers out there, I'm just learning my language, so perhaps I'm saying that wrong. But those stories are there. At the core of them is that sacred responsibility that we all share in creating a future of health and well-being for all our relations. And part of that is that these stories and these histories and these songs and these dances that have been sung since time immemorial and passed on to generations, and our job here is to pass them on to next generations. At the core of that are those values. And Coast Salish art and design have been based around these fundamental shapes. There's the sphere and the crescent and the trigons. And these shapes have been found on belongings, on our oldest belongings. So for me, I feel that Coast Salish art and design are also our Swochiam. Even in the weaving are these patterns that have been passed on from generation to generation. And even in the weavings are these stories and these values, these symbols that are giving us our guide, our markers for how to show up in the world. So I've been exploring how Coast Salish art and design can be expressed in the body, because I've spent so much time, I've had the honor to spend so much time with master carvers and beautiful human beings. You mentioned Ronnie Dean Harris and James Harry and Aaron Nelson Moody, also belovedly known as Splash. But all of those artists would honor Khalaptin as our mentor. And so I'm coming off of a high because yesterday was our final day of exploring Coast Salish art and design in the body as a methodology.
Oh, wow. Did you lead that, Tasha?
And I did, yes.
Yeah. And how did you find the response from the people who were participating?
Oh.
Yeah. What would you say was the fundamental connection to sensation and to this sacred kind of understanding and connection? Did you see it? Did you,
of course,
obviously you feel it all the time, but yeah, what was that? How was it expressed maybe? Yeah.
I think the biggest medicine of this methodology of dancing inside of these shapes is that these shapes aren't just shapes, they're teachings. And they're invitations into how to be in presence and feel landing here in these Coast Salish lands and waters. And when I say landing, I don't necessarily mean like landing on the earth.
No.
But I also, when I think of land, I also consider this space that is all around us, that is filled with the songs and the stories and the dances and those prayers that have been here, dancing and singing and telling and reminding us how to be good humans since these stories were first written in the land by our transformers, the Khals. So the methodology begins with landing and presencing. And I feel that this amazing experience on Saturday, actually, I was invited to work with Lois Anderson, who's also an incredible artist and woman leading work in Vancouver. And she just became the artistic director of Touchstone Theatre. And she invited me in to guide some artists into public spaces. And how do public spaces help us or invite us in? And for me, the big piece of that was I shared this methodology that begins with landing. begins with landing and presencing here in these Coast Salish lands and waters. And it begins with the heart. Because if you, I remember talking about this, the Salish eye.
Yes.
And so the Salish eye is a sphere, and then around this, and then beside the sphere is the crescent, and then on either side of the crescent is the trigon. And these are the fundamental shapes of Coast Salish art and design.
You also talk about them wonderfully on
Terra, yeah,
podcast as well.
But it comes from, I mean, there are many interpretations of where these shapes come from. But Halakton talks about the Salish eye, and also Celsius, who is also a Coast Salish artist across the border, talks about it in a really clear, beautiful way in a YouTube video. We can find the link, and you can
find it. I'll add it.
Quite lovely. Yeah. But it comes from a pebble being dropped in water. And that pebble, as it's landing, as it's dropped in water, it creates that sphere. And that sphere creates ripples, and which are the crescents, and then the trigon represents that ripple going on and on and on and on. But that beginning part of landing, of that stone, of that pebble landing, and it creates, that as it lands, it creates that pathway into the earth as it's landing. And Margaret Grenier, also a mentor for me, she speaks about one of the core principles of West Coast dancing begins with the heart connecting deep into the earth. And we can talk about, the heart connecting to the earth, and, we can be arrogant and think that could be an easy pathway. But how can we really land in these Coast Salish lands and waters easily until we understand history and the place above the earth, the land that is the stories and the songs and the dances, and there's much more wealth in landing here when you begin to understand what it means to be a place that has been cared for since time immemorial by Coast Salish families.
Yeah, I can hear as well in your voice, and I'm sure, and the kind of exhaustion or in the joy as well of having experienced all of this, and just what you were saying about that not being an easy pathway or necessarily an easy practice. There is something about the kind of generosity of spirit to want to learn and to want to feel this and to be present also kind of can deplete one overnight. So yeah, I feel that so strongly, but I think there's also, I love this idea that landing is not necessarily about arrival, and that is a big difference, I think, in terms of understanding or perception of the word landing. It's not about arriving somewhere. It's almost like you and I probably have the same thing with dancing and acting too, that if you treat it as a verb rather than something you have done or you do, then there's the activeness of it. The activity is absolutely vital. Otherwise, it's something else you're doing.
Absolutely.
Now we're talking about it right now. We're not doing it, and that's as valid in some ways, but it's a different experience, a different articulation. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And because it's not only the heart-earth connection, it's also understanding that the earth rises to meet you. That every step we take, the earth holds our weight. When we fall and we shed tears, the earth holds us and absorbs our tears.
That's why the ripple is such a wonderful kind of metaphor, although I wonder if it is actually a metaphor. It just feels like it could potentially just be a description because of the way that impressing on the water, but the water impresses back, It almost allows for that shape to repeat, or allows for the ripple effect. It's a conversation, it's a dialogue.
Absolutely. It's a dialogue. It's that reciprocity, which is also a very big value here in these lands. It's reciprocity. What you do needs to come from your heart, because you create ripples, and in return you hope other people and others are also creating ripples, and they come back. And it's that reciprocity between taking in that sacred breath and offering exhaling, we have reciprocity already in our bodies,
Yes.
organically
Yeah.
in our bodies. So
I think you've just described kind of a sacred responsibility for me as well, in terms of like how we then have a personal relationship to it, and because of that, we have a personal responsibility to the idea of the sacred. I think that really helps. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about, I know that this is very connected to Cedar Woman, and we'll talk about that as that is part of your residency with the Dance Centre as one of the artists in residence this year. So we will get to that. But I just would like to just draw on the house posts, because I think that's a wonderful, I feel like it connects and maybe takes out the body a little bit, but it does draw on family, and it does draw on identification of family or of tribes or of people who have been on the lands for a long time. Or is it more, could you explain house posts a little bit more for
Certainly.
our listeners and for me? I've read something about it through you, by you and the research and things, but I'd love to hear from you exactly what, because I know they're different to totems from listening to you and researching you, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the significance of house posts.
Kaken. So
Kaken.
house posts, they were functional. So they held the roof. They were the main beams that held the roof of the longhouse. So my mentor Halakton talks about how it's a metaphor of the values that are held within the house. And so when you walk into a longhouse and you see the symbols that are carved into the house post, you are seeing the values of that community. You could be seeing a moment, an event, a historical event. You could be seeing a family story that they hold on to. And they're literally there to hold the roof of the longhouse. And then the longhouse, is like a basket that holds the family and welcomes guests. And so it's taking them out of context. In the presence of ancestors is going to see 5 house posts raised along the shoreline trail in what is currently known as Port Moody, were originally named Seymomet. Each house post is a prayer for the inlet. Each house post has its own story that was carved by artists, and the artists come from the nations who share these ancestral territories here. But so the prayer for the inlet it was inspired by Tsleil-Waututh, the matriarchs of Tsleil-Waututh, standing on the front lines to protect the inlet from the installation of the pipeline. And Tsleil-Waututh, they do amazing work for caregiving of that inlet, because it's the birthplace of their first grandmother. And so in the presence of ancestors it is a prayer for the inlet, and has become also a platform for knowledge keepers to come to this land and speak the language here again, to sing the songs here again, to gather in ceremony here again, and then for non-Indigenous new residents of these lands to witness and participate in those ceremonies, to learn and experience that legacy of caregiving that they, as new residents, are joining as living here, so that they too will recalibrate the values of the city and understand their own sacred responsibility for creating a future of health and well-being. And so the House Post project is like, yes, it's certainly like carving into the fabric of Port Moody the original values of these lands. And also it's creating a visual reminder for new residents of the legacy they joined by living here, and the values that they are being, I don't even
upholding, I suppose.
yes
Maybe
yes
even.
yes
And I would just keep thinking about that as you're talking. I mean, I love how you speak. I would love to read a book written by you. But I also feel like there's a dynamic presence, like literally in terms of like embodiment as well of, so to put these house posts along a shoreline is both to situate them in, as you said, in with a visual kind of presence, but there is also a sense of a body, you know, in that moment of them standing where we stand, being where we are as in contemporary society, you know, among us, you know, amongst us, like, so not their presence is felt. And I feel like it's kind of a statement of embodiment to remove them from their function of holding up a roof, you know, and instead they're there, you know, upholding values and land, but also in the way they're also purposefully like visible and in the way of a shoreline, to remind that is why we see the shoreline, why we can see, you know, why we have access to the shoreline and to these vistas. I think it's a stunning and deeply felt kind of way of representation, if you like, without trying to you know, minimalize it. But were you responsible for that, for this whole project?
Yes.
You see, this is the part that I really would like you to. Yes.
From the beginning. It was so funny. Yesterday I did my final report for Canada Council because my part is, I mean, there's still work to be doing.
You did a lot yesterday, I have to say.
I did my final report yesterday.
And epic day.
And now it's up to the city, because it's the city of Port Moody who is taking over installing them, which is another process. So when we talk about in the presence of ancestors, and we talk about how they're going to stand along the shore, and we talk about the metaphor of house posts holding up, you know, the values of the longhouse. We as a community here in St. Mamet, currently known as Port Moody, we have been witness to these house posts being carved. We have participated in creating the gifts for ceremony when we host the blessings of the house posts and honoring the artists. We've gathered as family. And so when we look out on the shoreline and we see these house posts, we are reminded of our values as a community. We've really built community based on these values. And so we come together inside our longhouse, which is now currently known as Port Moody. And I think that that's such a beautiful thing. And now the city of Port Moody, as they take over all of the work to install them, which is, you know, all the protocols of like, how do we put house posts into the ground, you know, all around these waters, all around our shorelines, from our archaeological sites, because this is where we were canoe people. The waters were our highways, and we would come, you know, we would leave the land to go into the water. And so there's, you know, there are fishing sites and the transformer rocks that are there to remind us how to be good people, lined all along the waters. And so it has been a big educational piece for all of us. And at the beginning, yes, it was my first, you know, I put in a grant, you know, for $100,000 to, you know, and now all of a sudden it's like almost $1 million project because of like all the costs, like all of it. It's just been, and it was supposed to be a 2-year project, and we're at like year 4 and they're still not in the ground. And I couldn't have even foreseen the layers and the complexity of healing that needs to happen. And it's not only within the municipality of Port Moody, but it's also within the nations.
Oh, yes. And values. It's navigating values. I was just, you know, kind of jotting that down, because the taking care is one thing, but how you go about taking care reveals values, right? There's such a connection there. And yeah, I was just thinking, it's incredible. It's incredible. It all connects for me, because it's you, to dance and theatre, to voice, to storytelling, to I suppose role play, but more a sensation, more like being able to express in many different ways, and the artfulness, that's in the mask making, the carvings, all of these things. And so I wonder if we could bring this around to your dance and theatre kind of practices. And I love the idea, because I think with you this is a genuine thing of interweaving dance and theatre. However, you have a theatre practice where you work with theatre companies and a dance practice where you work with dance companies per se. But I'm also interested in, so there's your whole history and a long history of practicing in both. And then now I feel you're in a place where you are very much self-directing and very much like leading a project as opposed to being in somebody else's project. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is an opportunity maybe for the interweaving of all of the things you value and care about coming into your work. Mm-hmm. And so I feel, as I was preparing to speak with you, that the evolution of Cedar Woman also speaks very much autobiographically, or like for you, to this kind of opening up to other people, to the collective and the collective responsibility. And there are so many levels that you've talked about that, which is so beautiful. But I wonder if we could just kind of, again, I love the way you kind of bring all of this into a kind of story or image-based explanations. And so you've had this dance and theatre practice, and now you're in a particular place with all of that. Could you give the listeners a bit of a history on your dance and theatre kind of maybe training or like works, however succinctly you'd like, and bring it to what you're up to in the performance milieu right now?
Yeah, okay. So, well, it's very interesting that I'm working on Cedar Woman because my very first theater piece, solo piece, was She Stands Still. And it was an autobiography about myself and about coming home to my indigeneity through a tree. Mm-hmm. There was an old growth, there's a old growth forest, coccyx, which is most commonly known as Walbrand Valley, and there was a big tree, and she was like this lady of the trees, I called her, and she was raising her arms to the sky in Haichka, and behind her was like old growth forest, the most beautiful forest ever. I feel like it's like, I always say that's my heart externalized. It's just amazing.
Beautiful.
And in front of her is this clear cut. And so that was and now here I am doing Cedar Woman, which is again a cedar tree, and not just any cedar tree. It's one of our first grandmothers during the Great Flood. And so, my practice began in theater because I couldn't do dance as well. I couldn't, back then at Simon Fraser, you couldn't do both disciplines. You can only practice one. Mm-hmm. So I chose theater. Mm-hmm. And while I was doing theater, I was also working on, I also had this like deep need to serve. Like I needed to, so I worked with youth on the street, and I did work for the Attorney General for like caregiving of sexual exploitation of youth, and like wrote this show and toured the show. And so I've always walked this line of an art practice that was a way to express what is going on with me in my urgency to save the world.
Yeah.
Right? And so I studied physical theater, and so it's very much body based. And I studied with Linda Putnam and also with Richard Fowler. So like they both were students of Grotowski, and they both had their own different takes on that work. Mm-hmm. So I studied most extensively with Linda Putnam. And so a very body-based practice of theater. And then I had children, so I kind of ducked out. Although while I was pregnant with my son, I was in the Diary of Anne Frank at the Stanley. And then when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was working on a new piece called La Violencia, which actually never got done, which was combining theater and dance. And so, and then I went and saw Michelle Olsen was doing Frost and at the fire hall, and my daughter was just not even a year old, and I had left her with her dad, and I'd come down, and I was just like, it was my first time out, like after baby, and the second baby, and I saw this piece, and Michelle asked me to be in Ashes on the Water as a dancer.
Ah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Do you remember the year? Well, you'll remember the year, of
It
course.
was 2009.
9, okay.
Because her son, Cedar, was about to be born.
Oh, wow. Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Or maybe it was 2010. We can ask her, but
Still,
it was way back then. And then Star and I really connected with the land in Peru and our experiences in the Sacred Valley. And so then I was really sick, and I just was in the middle, sleeping in my bed, and I had this sensation to go email Star. So I got out of bed. I was so sick, and I emailed Star, and I said, and this is like almost a year later, and I said, Star, I was thinking about your work, and if you were ever thinking about if you were ever considering working on it, would you consider working with me? And she emailed me right back to say, oh my goodness, I was just thinking about that. And so that's how we began our journey together with
That's lovely.
Vine of the Mother. And it was really quite an experience to enter the studio as a theater practitioner into a dance space. And in the beginning, I think I was a bit awkward because I was in the room with my actor's body, and like and my eyes in the room is different than a dancer's, how dancers are trained. So I think there's been a little bit of an adjustment in myself, how I think someone came and saw a piece and told me that I really stood out, and I don't know if it was a good way, because I was just different than everybody on stage.
I do think it's related to gaze and related to intention and to understanding in some ways. But I also wonder if having the combination, and even if it makes you kind of stand out on stage in any work, because the combination of the awareness of body and the expressing through the body, and then adding to it a sense of intention of the individual being there for their own personal reasons and their own story, is going to add layers of connection, right, to an audience, and layers of energy. So I wonder if that's something you found in your own work, and where I feel like you are at with Cedar Woman in terms of its evolution as you invite people in to join you on that story.
Well, what I discovered with Cedar Woman was that I didn't want to dance alone anymore.
Yeah.
That we're in such a time of collective grief and collective urgency of like, what are we going to do? How are these things happening around the world that we don't have power to change or to protect or to save? And so I really wanted to have a circle that I could be part of, and that we could be an ensemble of women telling strong women stories, as opposed to just one person out there telling my strong woman story, and I'm out there and like, I'm calling Cedar Woman forward, and then I'm going to dance Cedar Woman all by myself. And it was really, I really needed to have, quite literally, I needed help with my mask, culturally and just logistically on stage. I needed help, but also, I don't want to dance anymore. And I really feel like community is where we need to be. We need to gather and share in our collective grief, and share in our collective healing, and share in a collective vision of hope for the future. I mean, we all may have different parts of the story of how we envision a future of health and well-being, and that's great. If we join in the circle together and we walk towards that, then that vision and that manifestation and those ripples and that trigon of that prayer will be stronger.
I love what you've said I realize the urgency of this story is about many women and it's not mine to tell alone. That's one of the wonderful things you've said about the new process for Cedar Woman. Mm-hmm. And also that I just want to bring up the mask or the regalia as you, because I love what you just said about needing people on stage with you to help you with the heaviness of the mask and maybe to put this on and give yourself time to allow the transformation or that space to occur for yourself. Mm-hmm. And how you've discovered that the dancers or the people on stage with you have gone from potentially assistants or being choreographed as assistants, this is where I need help, to recognizing that they, as you just said, have their own stories and their own connections and their own values. Mm-hmm. And I think that it speaks to also a place that you've discovered from community in your life and in your cultural work and in Port Moody, as I want to say it, say mamat,
yes.
Say mamat. And that I wonder if there's also something else you say, and I'm just trying to find it because I really wanted to quote you on it, that with this community engagement, you said, as we grind deeper and deeper into these unprecedented times, protecting the sacred is becoming a collective anxiety. And working together, dancing together, having hope together is fundamental to our survival. Mm. And I just feel that it's wonderful to read, and to say it, but to have a work where you feel like that is what you can do with a dance and theatre work, and with all of your history and all of your collective interests now. I just feel like that puts Cedar Woman in a very different place to when I interviewed you in 2020, I believe. Mm-hmm. But also for you, can you speak a little bit to that? Because just maybe to end with this and to bring it back round to the residency and to this year, we're talking on the first day of November, and the podcast will be going out mid-December, I believe. So there is a little bit of a time lapse here, but I have a feeling that lots of things will have happened for you in that time. But I wonder if just for now you could talk a little bit about maybe how all of these things, how are you kind of navigating all of these different roles that you have? Does it feel like that? Is this idea of this urgency that you are driven by and your value system supporting you in all of the work that you are doing? Mm. And where does the dance process, like going into a studio to work with dancers, fit within that for you? Yeah.
I think it goes back to the, again, values. Mm. And the methodology that I'm exploring with Coast Salish art and design and dance is really given me a huge gift. The particularly the process of landing and presencing, because no matter where I am or where we are as a community or a collective in circle, aligning one's own heart into the earth and feeling the earth rise to meet you is it's calming. And it also helps myself to feel my own medicine and the gift that I hold. And you walk into a forest, and if you walk into a forest with Cease Weiss, she'll explain to you the medicinal properties of everything that you see that's growing in the forest. And we are just the same. We have our own medicine that we carry as human beings. Each and every one of us has our own unique medicine. And so there's a feeling of, I feel almost a sense, I can't even explain it really. It's that the feeling of landing and feeling the earth rise to meet me there's just some medicine in there that feels, I cannot change what happened in the past. I am here today in this moment with all I carry, and I understand my values, and that what I do, it needs to come from my heart so that I can create ripples that will impact next generations, and that's all I can do. That's all I can do. And I cannot save the whole world, of course, but I can help myself. I can help what I can put where my hand goes, so does my heart.
Tasha, I feel like you have reminded us to be good people, and you have given us so many, like such a guide of how to be good people. Really, it's not just what you say for me, it's also understanding that you are doing this in communities and in diverse communities, and learning and wanting, feeling an urgency of learning and sharing, and I just think it's that will ripple out in all of your work, ripple across everything you do, and I think that's what people feel with you. And I just think that is so beautiful, and I am sure that that will also be how the work reads as well to other people that you work with, and out to your audiences, or out to the expansion of community, which I feel is really important when spectators come in.
I hope so. I think that I have this, I get nervous. You get nervous before you share, or you.
Oh yeah.
But now I don't get nervous anymore, because I recognize the service, that it's not really about my skill, because I really don't think I'm the best dancer or the most skilled actress, but it's about my service. Like, what am I doing? What is I just came off of a play that was quite difficult in the spring, and it was difficult for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
But when I was landing in the service, I'm helping. The service of this character is to help women who have lost children to suicide. And that's my service of this role. I'm here for them. When I dance Spine of the Mother, I'm in service of Star Story.
Loss. Yeah.
But I'm also in service of that prophecy. And so it's not about Tasha. It's not about my skill. It's about what I'm there to do, what the work is at hand. And for some reason that just releases me of like stage fright. And I mean, of course I still have stage fright sometimes, but it's all about what is the work for? What is the medicine that I'm offering? So it's not about Tasha. It's not about me. It's about what I'm doing.
And I know you've also mentioned this before, that it's alignment, your decision to take a project or not take a project, is also about that idea of the I, that aligns you. So it feels like the medicine, all of this information is informing your decision making and your values, and the alignment of all of those things is how you make a decision. And then, of course, the strength of intention and strength of integrity is paramount to then how you show up and how you communicate with others. I think that's what I mean by reminding us how to be good people as well. The rest is all like subjective anyway.
Yeah. Oh, it's so dry.
So much. Yeah, I think that's really, really huge. I'm not sure if you're talking about Bard on the Beach or if you're talking about a different show. But I do know that you've done the same thing there, all I want to mention about that is, if you Google Tasha Faye Evans, but there are lots of places Tasha's spoken about all of these other components, and there is something about your willingness to collaborate and speak up what your concerns are about a storyline, about a character, about portrayal of somebody. Those kinds of things I think are just so honest, courageous, and essential if we are actually going to make a difference. So I want to thank you for all of those moments you've put yourself in, which might not be in front of an audience, but are definitely in front of creators and in front of collaborators. And I think that's a very important step to take. And I, not that you need my appreciation of that, but I do want to share it.
I do.
Okay, I'm giving it to you in spades. Woo!
Thank you.
all the stars and fires and ripples I can possibly manage myself. Okay, so thank you so much for talking with me. I know that we don't have a date necessarily yet for Cedar Woman.
Great.
That's developing through the year, which is wonderful. And obviously there will be information about that as it develops. But I wish you every kind of joy and incremental success as you go through it. And I'm delighted that it's expanding, because I do feel like it holds so much of what you offer, and your story continues your story too. So yeah, really, genuinely, thank you so much for sharing, Tasha.
Yay. Thanks so much for your thoughts and kindness, and you're diving into things that I say. It's so wonderful.
I love it. I just, there's so much there. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for listening. We would love for you to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts, as this will help other listeners find us and help us to grow our dance audience. We'll be back next month. In the meantime, you can follow us on Facebook at The Dance Centre, Twitter at Dance Centre, and Instagram at The Dance Centre BC. And if you'd like to support our work, please consider making a donation. Just go to our website at thedancecentre.ca, where you'll find extensive information about our upcoming programs and events. The music for the Dance Centre podcast was composed by James B. Maxwell. Always a pleasure to connect with you through dance. Until next time.